So really happy to have Kathy with us here today, another Philadelphia area person. So since Kathy was young and exploring the Pine Barrens of her southern New Jersey home, she's been fascinated and delighted by the natural world around her. Never losing that passion, Kathy earned a BS in ornamental horticulture and environmental design from Delaware Valley University and an MS in public horticulture and management from the University in Delaware, where she was a Longwood Fellow. So after more than 2 decades in various horticulture and educational roles, Kathy is now an award-winning educator and public horticulture leader. With her goal in life to get as many people excited about the natural world as she continues to be, Kathy is the director of the Ambler Arboretum of Temple University, alum, where she is adjunct instructor for teaching woody plants identification and landscape management. And she's recently, for better, or maybe, for better, she's been able to add natural disaster recovery to her resume due to an EF2 tornado that in 2021 catastrophically damaged the Ambler Arboretum. I heard Kathy speak about this last year, I think at the Woody Plant Conference, and it was just fascinating. And so we're going to hear more about that today. So in pursuit of a graduate degree in adult education and lifelong learning through Penn State, Kathy is exploring how public horticulture institutions and alike organizations can engage the community post-natural disaster. Please welcome Kathy.
Thank you. And as Julie mentioned, I am the director of the Ambler Arboretum of Temple University, and I'm going to just tell you about our experiences, a little bit about the history of the Arboretum, and what we've learned and dealt with, and kind of the decision making that we did as we figured out how to manage and deal with what happened at the Arboretum. And I call this silver linings and lemonade kind of tongue-in-cheek because that's what people kept saying in the days after the storm. They kept saying, you'd find something that was kind of good, and they're like, there's a silver lining, or hey, there's some lemonade out of these lemons. And it got really frustrating, and I would be happy if I never heard those terms again ever in my life. But now that we're a few years in, you can definitely see, if we're going to use those cliches, those seem to be apt. A few years in now, it's easier to see those. And I do want to acknowledge before I get started that I am talking about this as the director of the Arboretum, but without my staff, current and previous staff, a lot of this wouldn't have come to fruition. A lot of these lessons may have been overlooked, and a lot of the work would not be done. So I have to acknowledge the staff. So here's my horticulture staff. We have 3 people that take care of all of these gardens. It's 187 acres. So here's my horticulture staff. We work very closely with facilities on this campus, and this is the director of facilities here, and he's been helpful in working with us and managing contractors and all of that. And then we have 2 other staff. So Anne on the left is our curator. So she's been helping doing all the record keeping for all the new trees that we have put in. And then Sam on the right is our educator, and she's been helping us develop educational programs around the lessons that we're learning post-storm. So without all those folks, none of this would be happening. So to acknowledge them. So as I mentioned, or as was mentioned, I'm the director here, and I'm also an adjunct professor. So I teach tree and shrub identification here on the campus. And I've been invited to talk a bit about the tornadoes, the tornado that hit here, the lessons that we've learned. And it's really important to know that this space was a place of hands-on horticultural education for a long time. And so we're carrying on that tradition now. And I think the other thing that's important to mention is that this man-made climate change cause natural disaster is not something that it's not unique to us. It's not something that hasn't happened before, and it's not something that's not going to happen again. So earlier this month, you all probably heard of the wildfires that destroyed, I think, 98% of the botanical garden, the National Botanical Garden in Chile. And so, so this is going to continue happening. And so I look at this this change that happened in our gardens through the lens of climate change and through the lens of this is going to continue. So what can we do? How can we use these lessons that we've learned to help educate and hopefully mitigate some of what's going on? And so, I think the other thing is important to remember that botanical gardens are places of not only conservation and protection of genetics around the globe, but they're also tremendous places of education. Millions of people visit botanical gardens around the world every year, and that's a wonderful opportunity to start to teach about these things. And I'm here to say that though our gardens look much different and our tree collection is nearly gone and our trees that are left look ridiculous, we still have this opportunity to teach using these. And so we can take the remnants of this disaster and use those to teach. And I think that's really important and something I didn't understand when I first got here after the storm. So a little bit about the Arboretum, what's now the Temple Ambler campus and the Ambler Arboretum of Temple University, which is the 187-acre campus of Temple Ambler, which is it's a regional campus of Temple. So Temple University is located in Philadelphia, in North Philadelphia, and this is a regional campus about 45 minutes away. And so this began actually as the Pennsylvania School of Horticulture for Women in 1911. And these are pictures of the students in their uniforms, in their long wool skirts and jackets. You can see hands-on practical education, so pruning and working in the greenhouse here. The school was modeled on similar schools in Europe at the time. It was founded by women, for women, and even funded by women with the express goal to offer a place where women can learn a vocation other than teacher or secretary, basically, which were the accepted professions at the time. And the school was founded at a time when not one college or university would grant a woman a degree in landscape architecture and horticulture. So the idea was that the school was founded on the principle of combining what you learn in the classroom with hands-on practical experience. So there were classrooms on site, and then the entire campus was considered their outdoor classroom space where they would learn hands-on. It's experiential learning. And so the students learned by doing. Here's a picture from later on in the 60s or 50s with different uniforms, but the apiary, which we still have today. And these gardens were never stagnant. They were never a museum to what was or a symbol of acclaim for particular designers or landscape architects. They were always intended to be an outdoor classroom space and a living laboratory where students could practice the latest techniques, install the newest trends, install the newest plants, and model, what was going on at the time. They would learn about the research informing new best management practices and put that new technology to work right in the gardens. In 1958, the Pennsylvania School of Horticulture for Women became part of Temple University. And the campus remained a place of hands-on horticultural education through but now many more majors were able to take courses and programs here and had the opportunity to use this very verdant campus as their learning space as well. So it's not just a hub for horticulture and landscape architecture. There's many majors that can be earned here on this campus. Here you see photos of the campus before the storm. We just happened to have a photographer on site and a drone taking photos on site the day before the storm hit. And these are pictures from that day. And so here are some students hanging out in our Adirondack chairs, just a little higher view and a higher view from the drone. So this was the day before tornado. The gardens remain a backdrop of I think of it as a director, I think of it as the canvas for everything else that happens here, that we manage it as a space that's relevant and useful and safe for all the other activities that happen here, whether it is learning or campus activities.
Instead of cleaning up the.
And so, so the Arboretum throughout these years, throughout more than 100 years, provided green, calming, safe space for campus activities, student life events, celebrations, classes in the gardens. You could just see it here through the seasons and students using it. And what I want you to know are the trees in the background, kind of filling up the space everywhere you look. And here's my woody plants class using it to learn trees, evergreens, even in the winter. So it's a space that's available for use and open to the community from sunrise to sunset every day of the year for free. And it's used all the time. And so in 14 minutes, this all changed. So on September 21st, 2021, it was an EF2 tornado spawned by the remnants of Hurricane Ida touched down directly in Upper Dublin Township and on the Ambler campus. The tornado was 400 yards wide, 8 miles long, and lasted 14 minutes. And this is just a report from the National Weather Service confirming it. So in that time, in addition to destroying the canopy and the tree collections of the Arboretum, 100% of the buildings on campus were damaged to varying degrees. 10% of the homes in the township were damaged, and more than 30 had to be demolished. And it was just a couple of months ago that we finally saw the last blue tarp come down off of a roof around here. The township's municipal building was leveled, and that's where all their emergency management equipment was. So you can imagine just how difficult it was. And if you're not from tornado country, which I am not, or I wasn't, but apparently I am now, EF2 means that there are sustained winds of up to 135 miles per hour. And some of the evidence that they look for to confirm that strength of storm is the loss of roofs, and then trees snapped or uprooted. And those are what we experienced here on this campus. So, I do want to just acknowledge that one of the residents in our township did pass away. It was the only fatality of the 7 tornadoes that touched down that day in the region. And I don't want to make light of that fact as I talk about how we are dealing with the storm and what happened here. There were 28 people on the campus here, and nobody here was hurt physically during the storm. And so I arrived on campus before sunrise the morning after the tornado, and I couldn't believe what I found. This is a glass panel that was over a campus map. And when I looked at it, I was like, that's exactly how I feel. I think I know where I am, but everything is all mixed up and kind of broken. And I was disoriented and just really, couldn't believe what I had seen, what I was seeing. And everywhere I looked was changed forever, really. So we lost more than 500 trees in the storm, and these are only the trees that are in intensively managed portions of the Arboretum, and they don't include the hundreds of more trees that we lost. The whole perimeter of our campus is minimally managed woodland areas, and we lost hundreds of trees in those spaces too, but we didn't count those. So if you're wondering what 500 trees looks like, this is one way to visualize it. This is we had to map all of the trees we lost, and then some other views of what the loss of 500 trees looks like. So this is that historic pavilion that I showed earlier, designed by Beatrix Farrand in the 1920s. One of only 2 of her examples of her work that was actually built that was still remained in Pennsylvania at the time. So this garden behind is the woodland garden, and had some of the oldest trees on campus because it was one of the first gardens that was planted on the campus. So here we lost more than 100-year-old sweet gums and tulip trees and that kind of thing. You can see the remnants that are left of the trees there. Just some more examples. The drone came back the next day to take photos of what happened. So you can see the size of the trees we lost. This was basically a conifer screen here, very mature conifers of a lot of different types. So we were able to capture before and after damage because of the drone flying the day before and the day after, which proved actually invaluable for working with insurance company and FEMA. And I don't want to get into the weeds of that too much, but I'm happy to answer questions or talk about it in that experience. But we dealt with both insurance and FEMA through all of this. You can see here the roof that are missing from the buildings, and then also the trees in various states of either toppled over completely or snapped. And this is the area that I showed you in the beginning with the students sitting under the trees on the campus. just some more examples and some examples of the sizes of the trees that we lost. I look, sorry, I'm going backwards. I look at this picture and there's two big Zelkovas right here in front of the doorway, and they're enormous. And I don't know how they made it, because there's a whole bunch of them that didn't. And you walk in, you're like, I hope, you're wondering what you might see that's still standing up. And it was exciting to see those big trees still standing. So just to give you some ideas, so well-established historic spaces that people had known, this has been a place of learning for more than 100 years. So there's a lot of connections to these plants. There's a lot of stories in these spaces. And so a lot of these popular teaching areas were simply gone. So here I use this area to teach about actually tapping for sap. We tap black maples or black walnuts for sap that we cook down into syrup to explain how you can use different trees and different sap to make syrup. And on the right-hand side are all the black walnuts. On the left-hand side are American pecans in this alley. And here's all the black walnuts on the ground after the storm. And so here's the space that we had that had significant meaning on the campus and now is just gone forever. And I don't, so one of the questions is, do you replace this or do you do something else with this space? And that's what we've been dealing with and the questions we've been trying to answer since the storm. Another representation of 500 trees that we lost. This is just a wood chip pile from the trees that we've lost. Eventually our giant parking lot would become a space for the entire township to store their stuff. But at this point, this was just ours. And then here's a pile of the logs of the trees that we lost. This pile would triple in size before it was finally taken away. And, this is a college campus and not everybody's plant people, not everybody's tree people, not everybody's nature people. There's a whole bunch of different people on this campus and people were I was getting frustrated because people to me weren't understanding the magnitude of what we lost. So I asked for this picture to be taken just to show the scale, the size of the trees and the number of the trees that were gone. And this pile would triple in size before we finally had it cleared away. And so trees that were research subjects in the middle of an old growth forest that we call an old growth forest on campus and were teaching tools seemed like they could no longer be those things. This is the same tree and you can see how the forest is gone around it and the tree of course is gone as well. You can see the residents behind it that you couldn't see when the forest was there. This was I'll tell you more about it, our old growth forest in a minute, but this is the type of damage that we saw. And then trees that were special to me in particular because they helped introduce the next generations of horticulture professionals to the wonder of our field. Could no longer do that. Here, our horticulture careers summer camp kids are learning how to throw rope into a tree from an arborist. And the arborist showed them how you could climb up into a tree and how that could be a job. And so then this big oak, of course, didn't make it. And so I started wondering, somebody asked me in the midst of the early cleanup and recovery, he's like, how can you be an arboretum anymore without any trees? And I was kind of insulted and mad that he asked me that. But then it made me think, what are we going to do? We've lost almost our entire collection. How can we be a place of education anymore without our trees? And so then I thought about this picture, which is one of my favorite pictures from the Pennsylvania School of Horticulture for Women. And it is a picture of the Pennsylvania School of Horticulture for Women. And it was actually published in the newspaper. It's during a class. And I'm just going to read you what the article said. The headline is "Girl Students Blow Up Stumps Like Trained Men." And the article goes on to say, while handling dynamite is generally considered a man's job, girl students at the Pennsylvania School of Horticulture for Women at Ambler are demonstrating that man has no monopoly on it. Donning midi blouses and short skirts, heavy sweaters, and old gloves, the students set out for the school orchard to meet Dr. John Down, professor of agriculture, waiting for them with a basket of dynamite and yards of fuse. Each stick had to be broken in two, and without the slightest show of nervousness, the young women broke the sticks. Others cut the fuse into 3-foot lengths. With soil augers, the girls bored holes all over the orchard in which to place the dynamite. The sticks were placed in the holes, the fuses lighted, and the girls ran to a place of safety. Dirt and stones were thrown high into the air. Besides practical work in the garden, orchard, and greenhouses, the girls have been studying the theoretical side of horticulture. They are too much in love with outdoor life to spend much time indoors. Many of the classes are held outdoors. The girls declare it will take a blizzard to bring them indoors. Here they were fearlessly using the latest technology of the time to learn a skill, hands-on out in the garden. Now, I don't know if this is their place of safety that they ran to. It didn't get into that, doesn't appear to be that safe, but here they were learning the newest techniques, right? The latest, and practicing it out in the field. And while what we were dealing with was not dynamite, it sure looked like there was an explosion that happened here. And so when I started to take a look around and we were assessing what was going on, we realized there's lots of stories in those stumps and lessons in the logs. And that's what we had to work with. And so we now had a modern challenge to bring to light climate change and center our teaching and learning around. We had no choice, even though this is something we wanted to highlight and have been trying to highlight. It's really hard to highlight those things and bring your message home when people don't feel like it's happening to them. You hear about climate change in the form of glaciers melting and polar bears and sea level rising, but you don't necessarily notice it or feel it here. And now we had this opportunity that in our community, at least, they have felt it and they could see the difference. And so our campus was changed forever, and nature had formed for us a demonstration area about climate change. And so here, for example, is standing water, where water never stood before in the Arboretum. And people who had never thought about these things before were coming up to me, Kathy, why is it so wet all over the place now? You know, I never noticed that before. And of course, that's simply because all of the trees were gone and they were not taking up the water, the storm water anymore. And so now we have an opportunity to show in real world, experiences what trees do for us and how much they help with managing stormwater. I think people don't give them enough credit. In our community, people were scared and they wanted to cut the remaining big trees down because they were afraid they would fall on their house if there was another storm. And so here's an opportunity for us to teach about how they're important and how they help solve this problem. And they're going to offer a lot more in the way of help if you leave them than cutting down on the off chance that this might happen again. But that's a hard message when it's very new to everybody, and I know that. Around the campus in our gardens, we do have stormwater management gardens. So this is our healing garden here, and this captures stormwater. And this is our sustainable wetland garden. And I had never seen these gardens so full of water as after storms, after we lost all of the trees. Luckily, they were still working. They were designed really well. And but now we're able to show how without the trees, these gardens get far more inundated much faster. And if we had more and more storms, these wouldn't work as well. We would need to add more gardens like this. So we're able to demonstrate this in person. We can bring people out and show them what's going on. So this is, if you can see under the green arrow, that's the director of the Ambler Field Station, Dr. Amy Freestone, and she's standing in what we called our old growth forest, and is now called the Temple Forest Observatory. This forest is about 10 acres, and we can't find any record of it ever having been agriculture or farmed. And so we call it our old growth forest. There were trees in there. They're estimated to be more than 200 years old. And it's part of the Smithsonian Global Forest Observatory. And so what happens with those is the same data is collected in forests around the globe so that it can be compared to what's happening with the climate around the globe and that kind of thing. So they collect the same data points all around. And 75% of this forest was inventoried. Everything bigger than every stem bigger than a centimeter in diameter was inventoried in this space. So and then they were they had set out field cameras and had been doing inventories of mushrooms and spiders and birds and deer and all of those things out here. And so we have excellent baseline data for this forest. And then the tornado came through and they lost about 85% of this forest. But the decision was made to continue to study it because it is a natural disaster. It's something that that happened to our forest. And so that's just being added into the data. And so research continues today in this forest, capped every 5 years. That same data the inventory is redone again, and they collect that same information. And so it continues to be a place of learning. And it's really important for us because now the Temple Ambler Field Station and this particular forest, you can see the regeneration, the regrowth of the trees here in this forest. Now we host researchers from universities around the region in our Temple Forest Observatory. It's the location of field research in community ecology, disturbance ecology. Temple has created disturbance ecology course, in ecology of invasive species courses that are hosted here in the Temple Forest Observatory. And we host a number of research projects. Many people are interested in this. Many researchers are interested in this because tornadoes don't typically hit old growth forests. And so the question is, when this happens, how do you manage this space? What can you do to prevent as much damage in the future if you're a person who manages spaces like this? We have a great opportunity for comparison because a portion of this forest is owned by the county. And with their portion, they clear cut it. They cut everything down. They removed all the debris. They took everything out and they planted 1,100 native trees in straight rows right next to our observatory here. And then there's another forest just up the road, less than a block away, that was not hit at all with similar conditions. And so we have this opportunity to compare and contrast different management techniques. Some of our trees are wearing belts. They're metal belts inside this forest that measures their growth, very small amounts of growth. It measures that. At some point, they remeasured the diversity of bird species and found more bird species in here after the storm than before it. So there's a lot to learn from here. They're trying to figure out why some trees fell and some didn't. If some trees were just taken out by other trees falling on them and not by the wind. So it has this space now has the opportunity to inform the future of many fields, including our own, but, for land managers, for municipalities and how they might think about the future of our climate and how they might deal with this. It will help them hopefully prepare for tackling climate change. We are also measuring ecosystem services and biodiversity. And so this is doing a lot to inform. We might make assumptions about a destroyed forest and its value, and we're actually measuring that because we left it. Our neighbors, just going back to this, we are surrounded by residences on all sides here, and our neighbors very much wanted us to cut everything down. They didn't want to look at it. We don't have to live here. This is their backyard. They were borrowing our views of our gardens and our nature. And when it looked like this, they didn't want to look at it every day. And it's totally understandable. But the university backed us up in explaining that we're a research institution, and what we're doing is contributing to the body of knowledge that will hopefully help with mitigating or managing the effects of climate change. And so they stay up. And so in the Arboretum, of course, we continue to teach hands-on in the field. This is still a place of practical hands-on education. And so we have volunteers and our staff and students and student gardeners helping with tree planting. More than 400 trees have gone in since the storm. They are learning all about different types of equipment and operation of that equipment. So it's a little bit different than the equipment we saw in those older pictures, but the story is still the same, right? They're also learning how to maintain new trees. We're getting a large variety of types of trees and sizes of trees that require all different types of maintenance. And so they're learning how to manage all that in addition to driving a tractor with a trailer on it, which is its own special skill. Here, landscape management students are meeting with landscape architecture students to help plant some of the new trees in the Arboretum. because a lot of our landscape architecture students will just specify things in their designs, but not really have an understanding of what is entailed in planting it or maintaining it or ball and burlapping it. And so they were helping us in landscape management class and learning more about that, so their designs and their specifications could be more informed. Here they are planting their tree, which is giving them ownership. And what I love about this is creating new connections and new memories with the new trees going in after the ones we lost so much of. So we are trying to get some big trees in here too, like this chinkapin oak. So the most exciting part of that video was, or that process, was the students had no idea how the tree spade was going to get over the tree. They didn't realize it opened, and they all like gasped in awe when the clamp kind of opened and released the tree. The other exciting thing was that it was mislabeled, and it wasn't the tree that we thought we were getting. And so we were able to key it out with the students. We were able to explain, hey, this says this is this. Let's use our oak key to see if this is really who it is. And they were able to figure out who it really was. And so it became a lesson, a teaching tool, even before it set roots into the ground. So that's pretty exciting for us. We also were able to install and had the students around to see a 25-year-old 12-inch swamp white oak being installed in the gardens as well. And so all the research shows that big trees don't do as well as smaller trees planted in the landscape. And we know that that if you were to plant a 3-inch, this is a swamp white oak, and if you were to plant a 3-inch swamp white oak, that 3-inch swamp white oak would catch up in no time to this 12-inch swamp white oak. And so for the amount of expense and time, resources, money that goes into planting something like this, you could plant a bunch of other smaller trees and they would catch up and offer more ecosystem services than this one. But in our case, we made the decision that we would plant a variety of trees. We have insurance money that covered the trees. We were lucky. We have a per tree policy, and they covered the trees. And so what but we have to spend it in a certain amount of time. And so what we decided to do was put in as big a variety of age of tree as we can in the landscape. And because we went from an almost completely shaded campus to an almost completely full sun campus. And so we thought we wanted to add some bigger trees to get some shade back more immediately, but also an opportunity to show our students and the various types of ways trees are installed and the way you can get them. And then also for research purposes, it might be of interest to see how these trees do versus other size trees of the same type that we're going to be planting. We'll also include, we haven't done it yet, but bare root trees to see how they go. So we're using it as all over as a learning experience. And so here's our students learning how to drive the water tanker. And they're learning, of course, about invasive plant management, because with all the disturbance and the new sunlight that's coming in, we have an extraordinary amount. We had an extraordinary amount of invasive plants to begin with, and now there's even more. So here, volunteers from Villanova University learned from an alum of the horticulture program about controlling large woody invasive plants. How you might do that. Our gardens are still places of hands-on education. Here they are learning how to operate a cedar in the formal gardens. Students in our landscape management class were able to do the restoration of the lawn in this space as part from the equipment that had damaged this whole lawn area in the cleanup. Our landscape management students learned how to do a lawn renovation. So very practical and timely education here. As the woody plants instructor, I've been able to make some strategic decisions about planting through the lens of teaching and learning. Here we have our new green screen. So I showed you in the beginning a lot of conifers that were knocked down and that had created a buffer to block the view of our maintenance yard. And it was mostly Norway spruces with a few mature, there was some firs and some oriental spruce in there. But here now, this green screen has a lot of different conifers included so that you can compare and contrast them right next to each other. And for our students or our visitors or people who have clients that they want to show them different types of plants, you can bring them here and then you can just have them in one space for study and comparison. So you can see how a pine is different than a spruce and how a bald cypress is different than a dawn redwood. And we've created spaces like this for oaks, for hickories, for horse chestnuts and buckeyes, and for maples as well. So we have these different study areas. And like I said, we've planted more than 400 trees so far. Most of them are balled and burlapped and average about 3 to 4 inch caliber in size. So these are not tiny little trees we are planting. We're planting nice sized trees. And the Arboretum collection itself is now up to a total of 750 different hardy woody taxa, which is more than we had before the storm. So we're really proud of that and the diversity we're adding. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how we're picking the plants in a minute. And so we've used this as an opportunity for students to work with us to solve real world problems. This vine display was designed and built by junior landscape design build studio students. The first problem they were solving for me was that I am not allowed to grow vines on buildings, and I needed a place to grow vines. We had also lost a lot of shade and a lot of height in our gardens. And so they used a foundation of a structure that was destroyed in the storm, but the foundation was fine, to create this space for us. So the Arboretum was their client. We gave them a budget, and they have built the Vine Villa for us. We're reimagining spaces with climate change in mind. So our sustainable wetland garden will have a mission of capturing stormwater, and will demonstrate an artful design to stormwater management. We're going to expand it now that we have less trees and more water going into these spaces. We're expanding places, our stormwater management tools, so our wetland gardens. The 2 rows of pecans and walnuts that I showed you earlier, we're not replanting that. It doesn't tell a story anymore, and it would take so long to mature. I'm not sure that there's a value in putting that back the way it was. But what we are planting there, in sort of a nod to the LA, is a climate resilient garden. And this is a place where home gardeners and students alike can take inspiration in a garden that is designed with future climate change in mind. So plants selected for the changing climate, and then also management techniques that keep climate change in mind. And then also this, along with other gardens, addresses sustainability in our food systems. With our, we have a food forest going in. This garden itself will include edible plants. It includes the pecans that were there. So we're looking to those as well. And then just as growth goes for the nursery, for the Arboretum, we are now also going to have a retail nursery that grows native plants so that we can help the community install plants, teach them about how they can plant, transition lawns into gardens and plant more to help manage the effects of our changing climate. So we're growing, and that will be an academic support facility too. We have nursery management course, we have a horticulture business course, propagation courses, and all of this will be working with the nursery. And so that's how we're remaining true to our history and our mission of being this place of hands-on horticulture education. But I told you I would talk a little bit about some lessons that we've learned throughout this process. And so I want to just share some of those with you. I hope nobody ever has to deal with this. It is heartbreaking, and I cried. It took me 6 months before I didn't cry every time I pulled in the parking lot of the Arboretum, and people would kind of look at me sideways sometimes. And my boss said, when you talk about the trees, you say who, right? I was like, yeah, I know. That's what they are to me. They're who's. These are trees that I taught, that I know very well, that they're my they're markers for wayfinding. They were places where I saw my students, light bulbs go off, and they're just some of my favorite trees around. So there is, it was very sad, but I have an interest in Buddhism and Buddhist writings, and one quote that I've read that resonated with me during this was, offer chaos a cup of tea, or invite chaos in for a cup of tea, not to run from it, but to invite it in and learn from it and sit with it. And so here are some of the lessons that I've garnered from sitting with this chaos and seeing what it could teach me. And these are in no particular order. They're just some things that stood out to me. So it's going to be a long time before we know the extent of the damage. And we have a lot to learn, and we're learning every day. And so I want to introduce you to this sycamore. This sycamore actually wasn't too much damaged in the storm, despite what it looks like, but it was leaning heavily over one of our structures. So I decided to have it cut. And when we decided to have things cut, we left some habitat totems, some tall stumps that we figured would be good for habitat for the animals. And then also I really wanted, especially in this space, which is our woodland garden, as we redevelop it and plant smaller trees, I really wanted that feel of big trunks that people could walk by to get an idea of the substance of trees. And so we left this one, and it had no branches. It was just a straight sycamore trunk with nothing. And by the next spring, it looked like this. It had all these adventitious buds. Epicormic sprouts had emerged from the edges, from the trunk. And 2 years later, it had fruit that you can see here, which just shocked me. And so the first spring, birds built a nest in this tree. And so what we're learning a lot about is the resilience of the trees that are left. And if we had cut this down, and if we had cut all these other you can see other funky looking trees in the background. If we had cut them all down, we would have lost significant ecosystem services. These trees are still alive. They're large. They have significant root systems. If we were to cut these all down and replace them with smaller trees, we would have lost a lot. And we're learning how much they still have to offer, even though they look ridiculous and look like they wouldn't do much of anything. So we're still learning about all of this. Of course, these are weak attachment branches. We know that, and we're going to keep an eye on them to see how they do. But for now, they're not hurting anything, and we're all really curious to see how they go. And we have a bunch of trees that look like that. As far as knowing the extent of the damage, this is our weeping beech. It had some damage to it from the storm, which was cleaned up, but then it lost a very large zelkova that was next to it that was shading one side of it. And now we're dealing with sun scald on the beech tree, and now it's stressed out. And so now it's getting some diseases and insects that it never had before. So we're keeping an eye out on all of our surviving trees, because every single tree that survived had some sort of damage. So we have to keep an eye out on them for insect infestations and disease pressure. And if there's conditions, you know, if we have a big drought or too much water, we have to really keep an eye on these to make sure that we're taking the best care we can because they're so stressed. So we're in the process of putting, you know, we're observing all the time and then putting plans in place to manage these. And we just, you know, we anticipate that we'll still be losing trees over the next 5 or 10 years because of this storm. And then here's that was the last beech tree on campus that was left. And unfortunately for us, the tree stayed up, but unfortunately, in order to get everything out of there, all the equipment, the big equipment that had to go in and get these giant trees out, these 100-year-old logs out, had to go over the root systems of this beech tree. And so though the beech was staying, almost the entire canopy is dead now. And so this tree will have to come down. So, you know, we left things up, but we're still figuring out the extent of the damage here. But we didn't want to take down anything just in case, or making any assumptions about how it would look or how it would function. We wanted to leave it up and see what would happen. So we also are celebrating small wins. Here, the bronze fountain of a girl with a pitcher remains. So you can see that, so this was all crushed. There was trees all over the place. There were branches everywhere. You couldn't see her. When the electric came back on, she started running. And it felt really great to know that we had some part of our history left. An iconic symbol of the Arboretum was still fine and functioning. And so we were starting to celebrate those small wins. This was, I guess, a silver lining, right? And this is a silly story. So this, you can see this is the L from the word library on the library building. And you can see there's a double trunked river birch in the background there. On the first day we were back, our students, if you can imagine our students at this time, they were the COVID students and they had just been allowed to come back to campus, and they had chosen to go to this campus because they were into horticulture and it was green and they loved it. They got to go to school for 2 weeks, and then then the tornado hit, and then their campus was never the same. And so the first day they were back, I didn't even try to teach anything. I said, let's just go walk around to see what's going on. And in my class, I try to teach them that horticulture is a part of culture, and that it's bigger than just what plants you're planting in somebody's backyard, that plants are universal and there's stories and connections, and that they should get to know those when they're making decisions or plans. And I'm standing there talking to them about this. And the librarians knew this plant and they loved it. They wanted to know the name of it, and they just loved this tree because it's at the entrance of their building. And I'm standing there talking about it, and I look in between the two trunks and I'm like, what is this? And I thought it was like a carpenter square or something. And I pull it out and I'm like, oh, it's the L from the building. And all this, I had 34 students and they all like jumped and cheered, like, yay, we found it. And so now here's a story, a new connection to this tree, you know, that they'll have forever. And it's a new start for the stories and story making in this place. So that was another celebration. We learned we have no idea how people are connected to our spaces or how they use them. And so as I was walking around, part of my job was keeping people out. Our arborists were operating as if we were closed and nobody was on campus because nobody was supposed to be there. But people still wanted to come in and check on their trees. A woman came in and asked me if this tree was okay, and I hadn't actually checked on it yet. And then I had to go and tell her that her favorite tree was not okay. We had to answer questions from people who had planted trees in memory or in honor of people and whether those trees were okay. And sometimes the news was good and sometimes the news was not good. And you got to hear all kinds of stories about how people were connected, which was, it was very heartwarming for me and also very sad. But to know that this was such a special place to so many people was really encouraging and kind of kept you going. I learned from a mother and son who kind of snuck in that our labyrinth was a place for the son to deal with his severe anxiety. And he had gotten to know the labyrinth so well that he could trace it in his mind when he was away from the gardens and used it to calm down. So they came to visit to make sure his safe space was still okay. I had no idea those kinds of things were happening in our gardens. We learned that people will help. They'll come out of the woodwork and want to help. They offer to donate things that you need. And I learned that it's okay to say, we're still processing this. Can you come back in a couple of weeks when we figure out what we actually need and the help we actually need? That is something you have to do. And again, it gets overwhelming, but you have to figure out your priorities and your next steps, or it sort of ends up as a ready, fire, aim process that makes everything feel even harder when you're dealing with this. These are just donations of trees that people made to us here. Refugia sent their team of their staff to help us with cleanup. You see this is a big black walnut stump here in an area. So we just learned so many stories. I learned that my perspectives may shift. This is a lacebark elm, and it is an invasive, and I had been talking about cutting it down, and because it's an invasive, but then it was one of only a couple of big trees left on the campus, and all of a sudden it became precious, and I got in a fight over it with the power line workers who were cutting it and making a mess of it. And so I might have gotten the police called on me about it disturbing the peace and impeding the progress of a project over a lacebark elm that I was considering cutting down because it's invasive. So my perspective shifted a lot. I got the nickname the Lorax after that. I was speaking for the trees. Perspectives on deer. I actually felt sorry for them. Normally they're a pain in my neck and we're constantly fighting them in this garden, but this is the day after the storm, and they were just as disoriented and confused and wondering what was going on as we were. They lost their home in the big forest. In fact, we found deer that were crushed under trees in the woodland garden. And so they were just trying to figure it all out too. And I actually had sympathy for these guys who normally destroy the Arboretum. So you can see what's going on there. So bit of a perspective shift for me. Of course, maintaining good relationships and communication with your contractors. I was able to call that night and they were there first thing in the morning. And then kind of in the weeds, reviewing your policies, insurance policies, and getting to know FEMA requirements and knowing exactly what records you need to have is so important. It's so important to have it before this happens. And so you want to check all of that, and you want to document everything. And if you think you've documented it enough, document some more of it. If you think they would never ask anything about that, record it anyway, because they're going to ask about it. There is nothing they won't ask you about, and use the technology available to us, such as photography and drones, to record as much as possible as you can. I can't stress this enough, to understand intimately the information that you will need. Now's the time to plant for changing climate. So the trees that we're selecting, some are based on what we have to teach, but others are based on our changing climate and the plants that are predicted to do well with our changing climate. And so those are the trees that we're selecting. We have this plant list that we're working on, and conditions that we understand our region is going to be experiencing, and we're choosing plants for the changing climate. And we're having our students help out with that process and help with the planting of it, because we know this is going to keep happening. We don't want to remove all the evidence of the disaster because there's so many lessons to learn. So we didn't clean up everything. We left a lot of the evidence, and there it is. You know, at our garden parties and our fundraisers, you can still see the damage, and that's important stories for us to tell. Eventually, you do find some humor in it. You have to allow space for grief, but you do find sometimes for levity. My staff person hated this tree, and she was not upset that it fell down because it made seedlings around the gardens everywhere. And the last lesson I just want to share with you, and I'm sorry this has gone long, is that miracles can happen. We actually changed FEMA policy. FEMA, as a rule, as this rule states here, trees, shrubs, and other plantings are not eligible for replacement by FEMA. They do not, as a rule, replace trees or shrubs in the wake of a natural disaster, even though they say in this policy they understand that trees and shrubs can help solve the problems. They just don't do it. We were able to prove through FEMA that our trees were teaching tools, that we use them as an outdoor, and the Arboretum was an outdoor classroom space. So we were actually able to have our trees replacements funded by FEMA as teaching tools. And so this is precedent setting. This has never happened before in the history of FEMA. And so even though this was a terrible thing that has happened, the fact that FEMA has now paid for replacing trees is a big deal, and hopefully something that we can do. We can help people, guide people to understanding the language that you have to use, the records that you have to keep, so that this could be the case for other organizations like ours. We're so excited about that. It's just, that is one of the most thrilling things for me. And of course, I don't want to downplay any of the tragedy that happened here and how devastating it was. But I can say that we are finding joy and lemonade and silver linings in what we've been able to do by thinking creatively, by going beyond convention, not dealing with things the way that things have always been dealt with, or damage has always been dealt with, by looking at a problem and seeing where the opportunities are for learning and lessons. And I hope you never have to experience anything like this in your lifetime, but the reality is that we may again, and you might have to deal with this. And so we have a lot left to learn, and I'm happy to help as a resource, but I hope that this has given some hope in ways of thinking about our changing climate and the problems it's causing, and the ways we might leverage it to help solve the problem. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Kathy, this is the second time that I heard this story, and I am even more moved this time. And I knew, I knew the ending, and it was amazing. And I can tell, from the comments in the chat, you as the storyteller have touched us, and this story is just an incredible inspiration. And there are so many lessons and so many stories here. It's just, it's great. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
For joining us and telling this story. And there's so much more. I feel, like in the coming years, there's going to be so much more to hear from you and to find out about.
I can't wait to have like stats, just real numbers, hard numbers for how things are working out. And yeah,
Definitely.
it'd be great.
And it's just incredible that you had, the drone the day before, and, you had all that baseline data for the old growth forest, and it's just incredible. It really is. A lot of the questions that came up, actually, you addressed in your presentation, but there was one about the old growth forest that was mostly leveled. And, like, how are you managing that for the people that want to come in and see it? Like, how, are you letting people in? Are there certain areas they can go?
Sure. So that area, so the rest of the Arboretum we safed. So we made it safe. We cut the branches and everything. That area is pretty much left as is, as the tornado left it, except for the perimeter where people might walk. In order to go in there, you have to get permission, and then you have to go in with personal protective equipment, hard hat, boots, high vis vest, and go in with one of our field researchers, or be trained by them in order to go in.
Okay. And then it seemed like you turned everything into a teachable, it was all teachable. Somebody asked about the soil compaction, after those big trucks, that the crane that planted, but you mentioned that then the students got to learn about, lawn renovation. And
yes, yeah, we've turned everything into a teachable moment. And I mean, we were able to, we even had that beach after the soil was compacted around that beech tree. We had an arborist company come in and do air spading around the roots in the hopes that we could, help fix it. And so the students got to operate an air spade and see how that works as part of this. Of course, it doesn't seem to have worked, but it was nice that the students got the opportunity to participate in that.
Right. Another question was about how are you researching and selecting trees for climate change?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of resources out there, and there's a new book that has just come out, and that is quantitatively has studied the predicted effects of the climate and how trees will respond to that. And so we're looking at that book as a guide, but there are some resources out there from extension agents and from other researchers that, for the Philadelphia area, they're saying by 2050, it'll feel like South Carolina here, with warmer and wetter. And so we're looking at plants that tolerate those types of conditions. And we're choosing microclimates around the Arboretum that are warmer now to test out plants to see how they do. So we have these little zone 8 micro habitats that we've been putting plants in that are on the edge of our hardiness zone to see how they do. And then if they do well, as we get warmer, they can move out into the landscape.
Great, great. And you mentioned that book. Maybe we could get the,
Yes.
yeah, we'll get the name.
It was the presenter at the Woody Plant.
Yeah,
Woody
yeah.
Plants Conference. Yeah, his book, I think it was just out this month. It looks amazing. So
Okay,
yeah,
we'll put that in the chat. We'll get that information.
for sure.
Let's see. I know I saw a comment from the Poly Hill Arboretum director. He mentioned about providing you seed from their arboretum. So that would be a nice connection. That's
Excellent.
yeah, Tim Bolin. Thank you, Tim. What else? So you're also doing you're working on a graduate degree, and you're exploring how public institutions, how the outreach happens. And you mentioned a little bit to me about this work. I wonder if you could talk about that, and how you're sort of having the opportunity to reach out and talk to the surrounding neighbors that also experience similar.
So I was studying something else for my degree, and then when this happened, the very next day, we had people calling me what they could do to replace their trees because they had lost their trees all over the place as well. And I had a woman who lost her house, her car, her job, office, everything. I mean, she was one of the houses that had to be demolished. And she was talking to me like 2 days later. She had gotten this tree in a lottery for the township, and she wanted to go and plant it in front of what was her house because it was something that she could do to improve her lot, something that she had control over, and something that showed promise and hope for the future. And I talked to a lot of people who were experiencing that same thing. And so I decided to, I wanted to learn what they needed, because we can go in as horticulture people with a lot of assumptions about what people need in their landscapes at a time like this and what we need to tell them about climate change and all of that. But I really wanted to know from them, they've lost everything. They went from full shade to full sun. What do they want to know and how can I help them with that? So I ended up with about a dozen people that I was working with on a weekly basis to help them redesign their gardens and prioritize spaces and kind of chunk it out so they could start making change. But, they were they felt exposed. They felt they were traumatized. They felt like our sessions were little therapy sessions because other people were experiencing it and they were sad about their trees, and not everybody gets sad about trees that are missing, and so I learned a lot from them. And so my goal was to figure out a way to develop a model of interacting with people post natural disaster that is not for environmental. My degree is in adult education and lifelong learning. And so, how can we interact with these folks in a way that helps them and doesn't, and just gets to know what they want to know and then move forward from that space and hopefully apply it no matter the natural disaster, whether they had to deal with a wildfire or a flood or a tornado.
Right.
So that's what I was working on.